Welcome to another episode of Pragmatic Electric. We're continuing our testing of the Enhanced Autopilot, and we're going to have a go at some of the automatic lane changing and navigate on Autopilot, which is just on-ramp to off-ramp, not full self-driving. Okay, so we're just going to have a look at the controls for the Navigate on Autopilot. So under Autopilot, Customize Navigate on Autopilot. And under here, we can enable this at the start of every trip if we want to. And of course, well, yes, we do. We can disable or have mild, average, or mad max speed-based lane changes. So if you're going to do auto lane changing, then you want to make sure that it's either aggressive, like mad max, where you're changing lanes essentially, even if it's only 1 kilometer an hour, the car in front slowing you down below the speed limit, you'll try and overtake. Or a little bit more average, it's more like, 2 or 3, 4 k's an hour slower and it'll overtake. And then finally mild, in which case, it doesn't really matter. All right, so you can also have a setting for the exit passing lane. So if I'm overtaking, then I need to jump back across to the outside lane, because in Australia, on a freeway, that's illegal if you hang out in the overtaking lanes, even though there's no one that you're overtaking. So you will get a fine for that. So yes, I definitely want to exit the passing lane. Thank you very much. Requiring a lane change confirmation. Well, I had on yes initially, but then I'm like, either I'm trusting you or I'm not. So at this point, I'm trusting you and I'm saying, no, I don't want a lane change confirmation. Just go right ahead and do it. And then finally, lane change notifications. You can have them a chime if you want to have a little ding, and it's gonna, before it makes its lane change, it'll vibrate the steering wheel is the other option, or you can do both. I started out with both, and then I thought, okay, the chime's annoying, I just did vibrate, and then the vibration got annoying, so I just turned that off. And that's it for customizing Navigate on Autopilot. So I've had to re-record this particular section of the video because the previous recording cut off most of the screen, which is kind of important when you're testing auto lane change and Navigate on Autopilot. So you need to see what it's doing. It doesn't make for a very good demonstration if you can't demonstrate what it's trying to do. So at the moment, I'm navigating to work, and what we've got down the bottom here is this little indicator on the bottom left here, which shows that you can engage Navigate on Autopilot. So we're going to do that now and watch what happens to the blue lines, and makes it a little dum 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 sound, which is very, very cool. So I specifically chose a 3-lane section of highway, or freeway I should say, because otherwise it doesn't really do anything. It only works on 2-lane or more divided roads. It doesn't work on surface streets in Australia. But I want to change lanes now. You can't see my blind spot, but trust me. So changing lanes is as simple as turning up like that on the indicator, and it will automatically change lanes for you, provided of course there's no one in the way. So that works fine. And you can do that at any time, whether Navigate on Autopilot is on or if it's not. And that saves you having to break out of Autopilot. So previously, if I wanted to change lanes, I would have to essentially break Autopilot by turning the wheel like this. So we're going to indicate and go over to the left here. I'm just going to break out of Autopilot. Turn that off. Whoops. And you'd have to re-engage Autopilot when you were done. So auto lane change without having to re-engage Autopilot is actually really, really handy. So now it's going to automatically change me into that lane because this lane is going slower than my set speed. Set speed 99, should make that 100 because that's the speed limit. And that worked really nicely. So far, so good, you think, right? One of the features of Navigate on Autopilot is that it's supposed to take you out of the overtaking lane when that overtaking lane is free. One of the traffic laws in Australia and several other countries around the world is that you need to stay in the outside lane. In Australia, obviously that's the left-hand lane, unless you're overtaking another vehicle. In Australia, there's fines if I don't stay in the left-hand lane and I'm not overtaking, then I will get fined for that. So it's a big deal to have it return after it's overtaken. So it's overtaken, I haven't disturbed it. I'm free to go into that lane right now. It's actually moving faster. You can see there's no traffic in it. It's free, and yet I'm still in the middle lane. So as of right now, technically I could be fined for this. So I don't particularly feel like getting fined today, so I'm going to force a lane change. I have waited 4 kilometers or more and just given up waiting, just driving in that middle lane. It could be that the algorithm is tuned for different, like North America, and perhaps the rules are different in North America. I don't know. The other thing about this feature that I find is that you get random phantom lane changes. So you're driving along, there's no cars anywhere, and it just decides it wants to change lanes. And you might think, oh, maybe it's planning ahead for down the road, you're going to do a right-hand, exit off the freeway or something. No, not at all. I'm not entirely sure how it determines when it should change. I just know that there are many cases where it makes no sense. Now, I've got this set to Mad Max mode, as I showed you earlier, and I've also got this on return return back from overtaking. But unfortunately, on those points, it doesn't do them consistently. And if I could put a figure on it, I'd say maybe it gets it right 3 out of 5 times, based on my personal experience. Of course, you could argue there's all sorts of other variables, things like, the road markings and road work. See, it wants to change lanes now. That's fair. We'll change lanes, but it's taking too long. And I guess so. When you're using Navigate on Autopilot and it's suggesting lane changes for you, there's a couple of problems as well. I've noticed that sometimes, well, let's start with the time delay problem. So from the moment that it starts to indicate, it will basically take 3 or 4 seconds before it actually moves. Sometimes it'll make sure that there's pressure on the steering wheel to make sure you're holding the wheel while it changes lanes, which is fine. And that generally works fine. Like, my hands are always on the steering wheel at this point. For this whole video, it's been on the steering wheel, and yet it'll still ask me after a while. It doesn't feel that tension against the wheel all the time consistently, which is annoying, but it is what it is. Anyway, so it'll wait 3 or 4 seconds before it actually changes lanes. So right now, it's identified a lane change. It's about 4 seconds. Just counting that in my head. We'll count that back in the video, since I've got it on video now. But what can happen is 4 seconds can be a long time. If you're doing 100 k's an hour and another car is speeding, which happens quite a bit, and they come up behind you, they can close that gap to the point at which it's no longer safe to make the lane change. And I've seen the car actually attempt the lane change, and the car will show up red, you're about to run into it. And I'm like, well, yes, you are about to run into that car, so perhaps you should not lane change. And I've had to intervene. So it's not really all that smart. It doesn't seem to be, and it could be a distance problem. Like, I can see a lot further into my rear view mirror. I can see back more cars. If we spin this around and have a look, it can see 1, 2, 3 cars behind me. I can see 12 cars behind me. Because I can see further behind me, and I've got a good judge from experience for driving for 25 years, I can tell if a car is actually accelerating and is going to come and overtake me long before they get to me. And so perhaps the problem is, because it can't see that far back, those 4 seconds that it takes to change lanes, it can't make the right decision, because it doesn't know that that car is going to move up into your blind spot and make it unsafe to change lanes. But that's the first thing. The second thing is, I said before about indecisiveness. It'll just decide, I'm going to change lanes for no good reason. And when it does decide to change lanes for no good reason, the cars behind you are seeing your indicators go left, right, and you're jumping between lanes, unnecessary lane change. Believe it or not, you can actually get fined for that as well by the police. It's the sort of thing that, having used this now for several weeks, I have to say, I just don't trust it. For me, 3 out of 5 getting it right is not worth the 2 out of 5 getting flipped off by other drivers behind you because you've cut them off because you've, have basically been annoying them by jumping in and out from in front of them and so on. They're wondering if you're drunk, probably. You feel like an idiot, and the defense, oh no, my car did it, is unlikely to fly. Anyway, so I'm waiting now for it to change lanes back again, but there's a car, and I probably would change back. You can see that car there is not that far behind me, but it has not actually changed back. So I'll have to wait a little bit longer. Still waiting. While I'm waiting for it to do something stupid, the other thing I find interesting is its choice of roads that it'll let you do it on. Now we're coming up to the inner city bypass tunnel, heading eastbound, and we're going to see Navigate on Autopilot mirror message comes up now saying will be unavailable in 100 meters, 75 meters. So as we come up to the tunnel, unsupported tunnel, it says, and it goes back to normal autopilot while we go through the tunnel. Go figure. And we're back on Navigate on Autopilot. So case in point, this is the Southern Cross Way, which was the old Gateway motorway before they built the second Gateway Bridge, and you can see, despite the fact that we are actually on a 2-lane divided freeway, Navigate on Autopilot is not available. So, interesting. Seems like some tunnels aren't supported, which I'm not entirely sure why that would be, given that it's supposed to be vision-based. In any case, and some of the freeway sections aren't supported for reasons I don't understand. So there must be some kind of GPS component. There must be some kind of pre-definition of what is permitted and what is not, or a criteria that's not clear. It certainly seems, or feels anyway, as being a little bit almost arbitrary. Major freeways, of course, seem to work, but other sections don't. So I'm kind of curious why it doesn't work, even though it really should during those sections. Now it's trying to change lanes, and there's a car there. Should I stop it? So it's going to stop and wait. That car did a dodge out to the right. No. Now it's going to cut off the white car. No, I'm not doing that. See that guy there? Yeah. Ugh. That's ridiculous. It's stuff like that that does not build trust. I know you got to have your hands on the wheel at all times, but I guess that's just one example. There have been dozens. That's just one I got on video. But believe me when I say 3 out of 5 is probably a positive view. All right, this. Okay, so we were going to change and then we didn't. Now we're going to change again. There's another car coming that way, so I'm cancelling it. To be honest, I'm getting a bit sick of it. Goodbye. I just can't even. It's like if it creates more problems than it solves, then what is the point? What is the value that this brings? Other than making the other drivers behind me irate when I cut them off, and potentially getting me in trouble with the police for bad driving. I genuinely do not understand the value proposition of something like this. It really feels like it's just not ready. And maybe that's because we're a victim of the non-United States software stack, potentially. Maybe that's the problem. But either way you slice it, if it's not ready, you probably shouldn't offer it. Anyway, away from So I guess the ultimate question to ask is this worth it? Enhanced Autopilot consists of really 5 key features, and of those, the one that I found the most valuable was lane changing, automatic lane changing when you're in autopilot. Because it's such a hassle every time you change lanes to break out of autopilot, change lanes, and then re-enable autopilot every time. It gets very annoying. But that value is only going to be present for someone who's actually doing a lot of freeway driving. If you're not doing a lot of freeway driving, then who cares? You're not going to need it. You're not going to miss it. It's not going to matter. And I guess that's the other problem with Navigate on Autopilot, only working on-ramp to off-ramp. If you don't have a lot of freeway driving in your life, then it's worthless. It doesn't do anything extra for you. If you are doing a fair bit of freeway driving, if you're going between interchanges, then I can see that would be very useful. I like the automatic lane changing, but its suggestions aren't always, they're still too sluggish, a little bit too indecisive. I think that's the problem with that. So those 2 features that I tested in this video, basically for me, one of them is worth having. Now, if we think back to the previous video where we looked at all of the parking and the summoning, so summon as you pulling it in and out of a tight space, I do see the utility in that, but having said that, it seems to be a bit more of a gimmick than actually something that's really useful. Certainly it's not something that I've ever wished I had. Probably, actually that's not fair, maybe once or twice I wished I had something like that, but I just squeeze myself in through that narrow gap as you open the door and I'd still get in and out of the car. Of course, finally, you could argue that Smart Summon has some utility if it's pouring rain and you have an armful of groceries and you don't want to walk 50 meters to the car, let's say. You could bring the car to within 5 meters of you. That's pretty cool, that's pretty handy, but it can't be too busy in the car park. And, you know, honestly, it's, again, feels very much like a gimmick. But there's a small slither of use cases where the summons could be useful. And then the final feature in Enhanced Autopilot is the Auto Park feature. Now, the fact that I was able to auto park this car more close to the curb and more quickly than Auto Park did, honestly, I fail to see the utility. If it can't do it as good as a human, let alone or better than a human, then why would I actually do that? It doesn't make any sense. So I suppose ultimately, if you really hate parallel parking, and I do hate parallel parking, it sucks, but I don't hate it that much, and frankly, I'm that much better at it than auto park, so I don't see the point. All right, so let's break it down. There are 5 features. So you can keep summon. I'm just not going to use it getting out of the garage. Smart summon, honestly, the number of times that'll be useful is practically none to me. Auto park is just nowhere near as good as a human can be, so it's slower and gets a worse result. Why would I use it? Navigate on Autopilot, you can keep that basically, because the whole on-ramp, off-ramp thing, it's just not there yet. It's not good enough. It makes too many either delayed or bad decisions, and it hogs the overtaking lane too much, and I'm going to get a ticket if I just leave it up to them. So that leaves one, which is the auto lane change. So if I could split the $5,000 cost into an equal 1/5, and I'd pay $1,000, I'd pay $1,000 for auto lane change. So Tesla, if you want to do that, I'm in. If you don't want to do that, I'm out. Enhanced Autopilot, I will probably not be buying it if it's worth that $5,000. And the trial will end, and that's when I will end using it. All right, and that concludes it. That includes the wrap up. There you go. Have fun, enjoy your free trial if you've got one, and if you don't, you're probably not missing much. Bye.